longer a slave to my sin anymore. Should I fall in the space between what remains of me and this reckoning? Either way, I will bow to the things of this world. And I know I will never be alone. There is another in the fire standing next to me. There's another in the waters holding back the seas. Should I ever need reminding, power sets me free. There is a grave that holds no body. Now that power lives in me. There is another in the fire. Oh, there's another in the fire. Oh, yeah, another in the fire. There is another in the fire. I can see the light in the darkness as the darkness moves to him. Hear the roar in the heavens as the space between rests in. Feel the ground shake beneath us as the prison walls cave in. Nothing said between us. Nothing said between us. There's no other name but the name that is Jesus. He who was and still is and will be through it all. Come what may in the space between all the things unseen and this reckoning, I know I will never be alone. Yeah, I know I will never be alone. There'll be another in the fire standing next to me. There'll be another in the waters holding back the seas. Should I ever need reminding of who you've been to me, I'll count the joy from every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. There's another in the fire. I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. When I need you, I need you. Every hour I need you. I want defense, my righteousness. Oh God, I need you. For my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. The head that once was crowned with thorns is crowned with glory now. The Savior knelt to wash our feet. Now at His feet we bow. The one who wore our sin and shame, now robed in majesty, the radiance of perfect love now shines for all to see. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. Your name is victory. All praise Our God is rock the green. Our God is rock the green. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. How great is our God. Amen. Man, it's fun worshiping with you guys. Would you greet somebody this morning that you haven't said hello to yet? Let them know that you see them, that you love them. Hi, baby. I love you.
I guess that's true. Someday I'm going to have to get a lighter one of these so I can use it as a walker. Someday next week. Well, this morning we're starting a whole new series. I think I talked about it a little bit last week called Transformed. And we're going to talk about this idea of transformation. I was looking at the calendar, and we really only have 2 series of teaching between now and Advent, like Christmas Advent. You know, we got like 5 weeks, and then in 6 weeks. Who said that? Oh, that's right. Faith is a Christmas person. I thought it was John saying that because he's excited to bring his llama back to church. Percy, if you weren't here for Christmas Eve, you missed it, man. We had Percy the llama here, which just made our manger scene because we all know that there were llamas. I love a church where we're so into context. But hey, Percy just stands there, and you don't even have to have a leash on him, and sheep don't do that, so. Or goats. Then we got to separate the sheep and goats. That was a Bible joke. Come on, man. In any case, we're talking about this idea of transformation. And what I really want to make sure we undergird this whole conversation with is the idea that transformation is so often described as this cataclysmic event, that I was transformed in that moment, that I became a completely different person from that point on. And, you know, I think sometimes, I mean, that happens to us, doesn't it? I mean, sometimes you have like a flashpoint experience in your life, and it changes everything forever. I think some people talk about that when their baby is born, you know, or when their second baby is born, and all at that moment you're thinking, what if I don't have enough love for 2, and then the baby's born, and it's like, I don't know why I even ever thought about that, you know. We have these moments of transformation. We have them in our faith too, where just, I think I mentioned to you Charles, the custodian that I worked for, he dropped acid every single day in 1976, and just told me about how one day he found Jesus and he just changed. However, when we read in the scriptures about transformation, most of the time what it's describing is not this immediate event, but a series of events, an ongoing process of being transformed from where you are to where God is taking you. And as we always talk about over and over and over again, even more importantly, where we are and where God is taking us as his people and his church. So let me give us a working definition of transformation. To be transformed is to enter into God's process of renewing our humanity. And this is a great, our humanness I really love this way. I think it's N.T. Wright that talks about this the most, but the idea that God created humans in a certain way. We can go to Genesis, arguably one of the greatest, well, the template for who we were meant to be. You've got Adam and Eve, these co-equals built in this garden, created by God to reflect Him as mirrors, to reflect God to Himself and to reflect to the creation around them. This purpose that human was given to caretake for the world, to manage the world. The language is to rule it, even though that kind of is a hard word for us to get our heads around, but to rule this creation. And with God with them in this garden, this was an ongoing eternity in relationship with God and each other, to the point where being naked had no shame connected to it. There was no dishonor or shame that existed in this context, which is why the idea of pointing out that they were naked makes sense, especially ancient Middle East. No shame, no dishonor, no sin until there was sin, of course. So we've got this template of how we were created to be, what we are meant to be as humans, and all through this story of God's people, and especially in the context of the threshold in time, who is Jesus Christ, living and dying and resurrecting from the dead, we have this picture that we are now, it's available to us to recapture what it means to be human. Or not even what it means, but to actually be human. And this is a big concept for us to get our minds over, and that is that is now. And we use those words a lot. I've used the language of eternity starts now. Life with God that transcends life is now. And that's all true, and we want to make sure we understand what exactly we're saying when we say that we are now in an eternal relationship with God, where He wants to transform us back into humans. We're this altered form of human, and we're given the opportunity here to be transformed more human. Am I making sense? Good. Never mind. I read too much science fiction, so like being inhuman is just like this. Oh yeah. Maybe, I guess, just for me. So, being transformed, God's process of renewing our humanness. What I mean by human is we were created, and there are three things that seem to show up in that whole deal, in the process of God creating Adam and Eve as human, is that we have this trifold purpose of intercession, of guidance, and caretaking. And this is I'm not going to go through on a huge tangent because it permeates Scripture, this theme of God's people being the languages of being a priesthood, a royal priesthood, which all indicators and the story, the way it flows, paints this picture of true humans, of God's people, the way they are meant to be and are transformed into, is that we intercede for each other and the people around us. I mean, that's what a priest does, right? A priest exercises intercession. I met with a guy who used to be a pastor this week at the coffee shop, and he was just telling me about how every time he walks in there, he prays for that coffee shop, and he prays for the baristas, and I'm like, dang it. Why don't I do that? I'm in there, I buy my $3, $2 cup of coffee and sit there for 4 hours. I should be able to dedicate 5 minutes to that. Interceding, guiding. We guide each other, and we enter into guidance of the people around us. And we got to be careful about our attitude there, don't we? Like you could easily walk in this arrogance that Paul rails against so often, and let me guide you in the ways, But there's a second nature guidance that happens in God's people as we're being transformed. I always think of my time in Durango as a raft guide, and there's an oddity to me that I don't come across very often, and that is that people are more important to me than the activity. And so I don't really like rafting. I'm not big on rivers and like going under the water repeatedly and snow runoff water that just, I mean, I come from the coast where there's cold water, but that's why you wear a wetsuit, you know? However, missing the water or talking a guy into letting me do guide school with them, I got to get a job as a raft guide. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the rafting to a great extent, but I really enjoyed all these kids who I was working with. Raft guides, some of the most like hedonistic characters in the universe that trade cheap beer like it's currency, and yet to be a follower of Jesus in this context, I definitely didn't come in like, hey, guess what, I'm a Christian, you know, and I'm a pastor, even though obviously that comes up, but by becoming part of this circle of kids and sitting around the fire with them, and we had an 80s night, and I think I was the only person there who actually had been in the 80s, who knew what kind of costume to wear, you know, but de facto became a pastor of this group of people because it's just what was going on in my life. And it showed up in these moments that I could not have orchestrated, like when a woman died on one of our trips. And I ended up sitting with almost every single kid on this staff, but especially the guides that were there, the guide who also fell out of the boat, and this 20-whatever-year-old kid is just asking me, like, I'm a jerk. Why am I not dead? And this woman with her children waiting for her at the train depot is gone, you know. So we intercede, we are guides, even in a humble, de facto, unorchestrated sense, and we're caretakers. We are meant in our humanness to be caretakers of each other, of people, and of the world. We are meant to have this perspective where we look around us and we see the echoes of creation, we see actual creation, and we are designed to appreciate this above all in terms of a sinful world. We are meant to look around us and say, this is the work of our Creator. This is the work of our Creator that we are purposed and actually designed to take care of. And what a bummer that to even like, I'm saying these words in the back of my head and like, okay, is anyone like worried about the politics of ecology and trying to interpret what I'm saying? Am I, you know, all that stuff aside, our humanness begets us looking outside and just being in awe of what God has made. Interceders, guides, caretakers. And here's the thing, is in the not yet, we talk about the now and the not yet. In the not yet, that continues. The Scripture is really clear that the end is not dying and going to heaven. The end of this world here is a transition into a new creation, a renewed creation, and all of that purpose and design and our creation from the beginning is what looks like to spend eternity with God after the end. Paul calls it the day of Christ. After the day of Christ, there's this tangible resurrection. Is why it was such a big deal that Jesus showed up and ate food with them. Because he is the template, he is the example of what ultimate resurrection will be like when we sit around and eat food. Maybe we don't gain weight, I don't know, or maybe we do and we don't care. You know, but there's this eternity with God where those things continue. The chance to intercede for each other. And maybe, you know, at that point, it's not about interceding, you know, with sin so much as interceding and covering each other and standing by each other and walking alongside each other, guiding each other in this process of the eternal caretaking the way God intended from the beginning. Do you get that picture of eternity with God? So in the not yet, this continues, everything we're talking about. I think an argument can be made that we continue to be transformed. We're not being transformed from broken human into real human, but we will continue to be developed and grow and to dive into further intimacy with God throughout eternity. That's the whole point. That was what it was from the beginning. Read Adam and Eve, and that's your best picture of the day of Christ post. You with me? Okay. That's the not yet. And in the now, we are already tasked with being transformed into true humans. So I think I said this last week, but the way I would sum that up basically is, in terms of transformation is a function of hard work over time. And if you've been around church circles, you might have intersected or been a part, or have a background, and even maybe some PTSD around a very legalistic system that reads transformation as a function of hard work over time into you got to follow the rules. And to the extent that you follow the rules, you please God, and He takes care of you. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm also not talking about the opposite, which is a tendency of some of us lean more in this direction of the drift philosophy, that I just accept Jesus and I want to bask in His glory and I want to worship Him, and all that stuff it's going to flow out of that. I desperately wish that was true. And I really hope that I can get better in my life of not living my entire life that way. But somewhere between the drift idea and this idea of following the rules is a process of hard work. I mean, Jesus is the example of His part of that hard work, God's hard work, the hard work of the Holy Spirit, and our movement within that. And over time, that is what transforms us. So I want to get really practical, though. I want to talk about this in terms of, like, what does it look like? What do we see that God is doing and wants to continue to do that transforms us specifically and over again, me for us? What does it look like for me to embrace this on a personal level for us? What does it look like for me to come before God individually but not get stuck there? And not think that this is about me become a better person, but what does it look like for that to be for us? So today I want to look in Philippians, a letter from Paul to the church in, take a wild guess, Philippian. But if you've got a Bible, turn to Philippians chapter 1. This is actually a pretty famous passage. You've probably seen it written with like a picture of a little kitten hanging off of a branch. Sorry if I destroy that for you this morning, but Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, Paul says, I am confident of this, that the one who began a good work among you will bring it to completion by the day of Jesus Christ. Have you heard this verse before? I'm confident. Maybe there's different translations, but it all says the same thing. I'm confident that the God who began a good work in you will continue it to completion when Jesus returns. What a beautiful picture. Again, we have to be careful, because if I'm looking at that in terms of me, then I start to think, well, maybe this is sort of a pick-me-up passage. Like when life gets hard, I'm looking for someone well-meaning to either say or give it to me in Hallmark form that just says, hang in there, buddy, because God will complete the good work that He started in you. And it's not untrue, again, that God works within each of us, but listen to what Paul is saying. And this is chapter 1 of a letter to what person? An entire church community, the capital C church in the city of Philippi, and everything that's going on there, and the way that they're growing and moving and being persecuted and having to figure stuff out because it's so recent historically to where Jesus is gone and resurrected. And Paul writes a letter to the church in Philippi, and he says, I am confident in this, recognizing what's already going on in them, right? The one who began a good work in you will continue. My translation says, which I think is a little more accurate, he who began a good work among you. God, who is already doing things in and through you, the church in Philippi, He will continue to do that. I'm confident He will continue to do that good work, even up to the day of Jesus. So let's unpack this a little bit. Written to the church community, the very beginning, it says, Paul and Timothy, we are servants of Jesus Christ, and this is to all the saints. The good work was started among them, which goes back to what I keep saying. My part is for us. So what is the good work? Like I said, I want us to get as practical as we can here. So if you feel like I'm just saying stuff and not like getting you an idea of like where that goes with you, let me know, because that's the goal here. But so then, what is good work? When Paul says, I'm confident that he who began this good work, what does he mean? And so I can unpack that language a little bit, and then maybe that'll help us as we look at this overall. But essentially, unpacking the word good, which we get it, and it's like, that is good. My son spent about 5 hours yesterday making gumbo. It was amazing. And the ironic or weird part of that is he did it because he had some friends coming over to play video games that night, and he wanted to feed them, which he does often. But in walk these early 20s, like video game Dungeons and Dragons playing guys who would just as soon eat a microwave burrito as 5-hour gumbo. And I'm listening to them, and they're like, that's good, like, can I put hot sauce in it, or can we put cheese on it, and I don't think it bummed Oscar out. I think he just had a great time feeding his friends. But, man, talk about hard work over time. But we say, oh, that's good. The good that we're looking at here that Paul is saying is makes sense to us in a biblical context because it's about this saving work of God. The ongoing salvation of God. Good, something that is useful, that has purpose, specifically empowered by God. So good work, then, would be the work, the accomplishment, the act or deed. I found one interesting note about that word work, and it says, anything accomplished by hand, art, industry, or mind. So you can imagine the work that is produced either when we're working with our hands or an artistic expression, industry, the things that we put together even as we organize and take care of each other. I'm thinking of we've got plenty of industries, right? But even like construction, anything that's put together with our hands that's operating, that's useful and purposeful. And obviously the work in our minds. So you get that picture. And if you put God in that picture, then we're looking at this ongoing goodness, this salvation that God is producing out of his work, out of what he is accomplishing, what he is. I just love that picture. I just want to picture God working with his hands, expressing himself in this work. It's industrious, which again I think points to this idea of community, of a collective. So the good work and then completion is fairly straightforward. He'll bring it to completion, something that is perfected, that is accomplished. So here, let me boil this down then. The good work, it seems, as according to what Paul is saying, the language he uses, is God's purposeful and ongoing salvation that is perfected in us through Jesus Christ. God's purposeful and ongoing salvation. Now, that's also a word that we've talked about before, but this idea of salvation, we use salvation most of the time for this kind of moment where we cross a threshold with God and we say, Jesus, I accept your gift. I repent of my sin. God, I want to enter into a relationship with you. I want to have your spirit in me to guide me, to transform me. And yeah, that is salvation. And salvation is also an ongoing thing that we see in the scriptures. So there's these two things that we want to put in tension sometimes, but they're actually just kind of married to each other. Hard work over time, both yours and God's. This idea that God has this ongoing salvation. It's a good work. The salvation of entering a relationship with him and the ongoing salvation that is transformation. He began this purposeful and ongoing salvation, and it's being perfected in us, and that is through Jesus. Are you seeing how we're kind of closing up the loopholes of drifting and legalism there? I hope so. So then Paul continues, and again, let's try to be practical. So what does he mean by this good work? What is he seeing in Philippi that he's pointing out that he's confident God is going to continue doing? If that's our basic understanding of what a good work is, according to Paul here, we just need to go a little bit further in this chapter. And if you start in verse 9, Paul says, "And this is my prayer, that your love may overflow more and more with knowledge and full insight to help you determine what is best, so that in the day of Christ you may be pure and blameless, having produced the harvest of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ for the glory and the praise of God." Now, if you're in the legalistic mindset, what are you going to read there? Oh, yeah, pure and blameless. Great, give me the checklist. You know, if you're on the drift end of the spectrum, you're going to say, yes, Jesus, take the wheel. You know, guide me down the river of purity and blamelessness. And maybe you're thinking, maybe that thinks more like that's a state of mind, like a purity and blameless state of mind. If you're a high schooler in the 80s, that means you put on a promise ring and don't have sex till you're married. Not that there's anything wrong with not having sex till you're married. My prayer is that your love may overflow more and more, knowledge and full insight. So again, what is the good work that God has begun among this church? First and foremost, it would appear that there's this increasing overflow of love. An overflow of love. And he describes knowledge and insight. And what that language seems to reflect is an experiential knowledge. The knowledge of having experienced it. Not just a knowledge of having read a book and saying, oh, I hate that I do this all the time, but like, oh, you know what book you could read? Or I just read a book that talks all about that. This isn't the knowledge that comes from a book or a study necessarily, but an experience that buttresses that understanding. Does that make sense? Like, literally, Paul is saying this love that you are experiencing, that it would overflow. My prayer for you is that God's good work, this ongoing purposeful transformation, salvation that he is producing in you, I pray that that would overflow with the kind of love that you know, not that's just that you know about. I pray for your friendships, that they would grow deeper and that you would know what it means to have a wingman. I want you to know what that means. I don't want you to just watch it on Top Gun and then imagine what it'd be like to have a buddy. I want you to know this love. And I want this to be a knowledge that develops into full insight. This is a perception of the intellect and the senses. Heart, mind, soul, and strength comes to mind. That you would know this and have full insight to be aware of what this love is, where it's coming from, and where it's going. So I think I would say that the result then of what was going on in Philippi, and of course we're always trying to think this was written to them for us, but the result then becomes an ability to determine what is best. I mean, that's what he says, isn't it? My prayer is that your love would overflow more and more with knowledge and full insight to help you determine what is best. On the legalistic side, what are we saying when we read that? Oh, I get to figure out what the rule is. I want to understand what God's will is for my life. Yes, God has great will. He has a lot of will. He talks a lot about his will. But sometimes I think we put this pressure on God, essentially, to say, what is your one will? What is this one path that I'm supposed to follow? And on a good day, I think that means we want to honor God and glorify him. On a bad day, I think what we're saying is, whatever decision I'm about to make, I need to be able to blame it on you if it goes bad. We want to determine what's best, but we don't want to do that in terms of the rules, and we don't want to do that in terms of just like, well, wherever this goes, the Spirit's leading, and it's probably the best thing. God must have wanted it that way. Wow. I mean, the sheltered life you would have to live to walk through life and just say, God must have wanted it to be this way. The life that none of the rest of us really get to live, I think. but a discernment that it gives us the ability to determine what's best for you and me as we together navigate our purpose as renewed humans. So if transformation is about being renewed as humans, it's about becoming human right now in the now, in light of and moving towards the not yet, if that's what transformation is, and we're going to increase in an overflow of this love, knowledge and insight, the result is that we begin to be able to understand what is best, what is good. This good work that is God's work of ongoing salvation, we have the opportunity as Paul's prayer, as we are overflowing with this tangible love, we together are able to discern what is the good work, what is best, what is our good work that God is trying to do in and through us as a congregation, as a church community, as the church at large. And what am I doing and what am I experiencing in that love that makes that possible in a way? I don't have control over the God where he can't accomplish what he's trying to do without me. However, God isn't going to accomplish what he wants to do without me. Somehow those are both true statements. Not because we have power over God, but because the way God functions is through his body. And so the body is limping along without you doing what you were meant to do, what God is shaping in you as you become a new human. Are you seeing how those things like come together? Okay. Yes, Jim. Oh, beautiful. I think the result there is that we see what's best, we see what the good work is. We can be sincere instead of nice. You ever notice how some Christians you meet, especially pastors for some reason, have this like slimy feeling to them, like they're trying to pick you up at a bar? You know, I had a T-shirt that said "Canoes for a Cause" the other day, and a guy saw me in the coffee shop, had a Bible, and he's like, "What's your cause?" You know, I was like, ugh. Well, that day I was picking up garbage, I guess, by the river, and there were no canoes involved for some reason. In any case, we no longer have to sell God because we're determining what this good work is, and it permeates us, and we experience it, and I don't have to try and sell it to you because I'm in it. Another result that Paul talks about is we're made pure and blameless. Again, what a great spectrum of thought we can have on that. But essentially, language-wise, there's this great there's a great interpretation that I read this week that said tumbled like rocks. You ever have, when you're a kid, you ever have a rock tumbler where you like crank it, you know, and then you realize it's basically like the ice cream machine where like maybe 6 years from now we're going to have a little bit of vanilla, you know, but if you can picture a rock tumbler that is tumbling and the rocks are becoming made smooth, essentially when you go to the beach, that's what we're seeing, or the river, and you got these great river rocks, tumbled, being proven to be tried and true. This good work of ongoing salvation on purpose that God is doing as he transforms me and us together creates this experience of love. The result is that we're able to discern what the good work is as we enter into it, and we are made pure and blameless. We are tumbled and proven to be tried and true in that. Again, not because we can prove it with 6 points of scripture and good doctrine, but because we can show you and we've experienced, and I can just say, man, you got to meet these people that have held me up and tumbled with me in this. The result is that we become experts in the biggest virtues, character that we could develop as followers of Jesus: faith, hope, and love. Faith, what we've been persuaded is true. Hope, our expectations that we have that are based on what we know to be true. And love, our willingness to lay down our lives for each other. And here's what I want to say on this picture too, because he's talking about being pure and blameless and righteous, and again, there's all the pitfalls of how we can interpret that. Jesus isn't coming back when we become perfect. Do you get that? Jesus isn't waiting around for us to get to a certain place in our goodness and in living our best life, and then he's going to say, okay, that's what I've been waiting for. I'll come back now. First of all, how arrogant is that? I'm just waiting for Chip to get it together on this, and then I'm going to bring all humanity and usher them into eternity. Jesus isn't coming back when we are perfect. He's going to come back when he comes back, and he is perfecting us in the now. He is perfecting us, and when he comes back, he'll bring that to full completion, but he's not waiting around with this standard of perfection that he's waiting for you to get to, and if you would only do that, then we could all go home. You grew up as a missionary kid, maybe especially in the 80s, you get the 1040. Is it still 1040? That's bizarre. There's been like this latitude, longitude of like the unreached people on the earth that apparently hasn't budged in the last 30, 40 years. But there's this window, and you grow up with this thing like, if we just shut that window, then everyone will have heard about Jesus, and Jesus can finally come back. I just don't think that's what that is. I think to understand, like, man, could you imagine this space, this window that hasn't been reached with Jesus and what it would look like to share that? Absolutely. How exciting. But Jesus isn't waiting around for that to happen. Paul goes on to say again that we have this righteousness, this harvest of righteousness. Righteousness, we could use words like justness, integrity, virtue, like I just said, faith, hope, and love. There's reference in this language to ideas. You could picture a king who renders his people to God as acceptable, a good king. All right, so let me just wrap this up. I want to give you a picture of how I have seen this happening in our church. Are you ready? This idea of the good work happening among us that produces this harvest of righteousness, that prepares a group of people being perfected in purity and blamelessness. A little over a year ago on Good Friday, we were cleaning up in our office after the service. If you went, we had these great stations of prayer. And afterwards, Debbie Olson was sitting on the couch, and she had bronchitis or something that was making it hard for her to breathe. When she went to the doctor, she found out she had stage 4 cancer, which wasn't what she was looking for. And here's what happened. Here's how good work, ongoing, purposeful salvation that creates this overflow of love, this is what happened in our church community. First of all, we stepped in toward Debbie. Not just try to solve her problem, not to give her books on how to fight the thing and how to beat it, but we stepped and leaned in to Debbie. We came around her in love. We prayed for her. When she couldn't come to our service anymore, one Sunday I remember we had her on FaceTime, and she's like on the phone, and you could see her head, and we're just passing her around. When she couldn't show up to the office, we zoomed her in on the TV to be part of our staff meetings, all the way till weeks before she actually passed. We prayed for her again and again. We did the hard work of walking with her over that year plus. As her health deteriorated, as all the things that happened, we walked with her in that. It's crushing to my soul how often I see Christians especially, or along with everybody else, who feel so uncomfortable with death and disease that we would rather ignore or hold someone at arm's length until they're already gone to confront the reality of that. You guys didn't do that. You didn't leave Debbie behind and wait till she was dead to be able to show up to a memorial and talk about what a great gal she was. You guys went to her house, you called her, you talked to her. You knew that she wanted plants instead of flowers. You did the hard work, the good work. That was a love that Debbie could experience and see and touch. That was an overflowing love that she knew in her bones, literally to a great extent. It saturated her heart, it filled her mind, and it fed her soul through the entire process. And she reciprocated that to the very end. Debbie prayed for you so much, especially when she couldn't sleep and she was like laying there. She would pray for you guys. Like she would literally try to go through your names in her head and think through all the different families in our church. It was a love that transformed her into a strong woman who could die well. Our righteous harvest that we came together to deliver our sister to God pure and blameless, with a story of her righteous harvest and ours in her. Our process of transformation, and we don't like to focus on this, but it is the story of Scripture, is that the process of transformation ultimately develops habits and experiences of suffering well as we live in a heartbreaking world. What we do for each other up to the day of Christ, when we'll be reunited with Him and His work comes to completion. Eugene Peterson actually wrote, and I'm fascinated by this. I'm still trying to kind of get my head around it, but he wrote, the ultimate work of a pastor, and I'd argue the whole church, is to help the church community die well. What a downer of a thought at first. And so I imagine in the context of the early church, that makes perfect sense to me because they were facing death all day long. There was so much persecution. Philippi, we talked about Thessalonica last week. Like there was so much going on that these guys could have been killed at any moment. And so for them to hang together, to walk with each other in unity and in love, and to take care of each other and to intercede for each other and to guide each other, all of that was because they were trying to get each other to the point where if that happened and when that happened, however that happened, that they would be ready to die well in those circumstances. And in a broader sense, we all die. And instead of just waiting and thinking, okay, well, whenever that happens, I'm going to go to heaven, so that's good, so I'll just kind of live as good as I can and become a good person until then, that is completely bombing on what Jesus is trying to accomplish in us, how He's trying to transform us into human. We walk with each other. Debbie is a perfect picture in my head of what that looks like in a small one situation. And that's a picture of how we are meant to operate. Everything I do in seeking transformation in my life is for us. And if I was Paul, I'd say, this is what I see going on. This is the good work I see God doing in you. Let us move forward in that. I said at the beginning that transformation is a function of hard work over time. And I wonder if maybe as we move forward, we could switch that around a little bit and say that transformation is a function of good work over time. Transformation is a function of God's ongoing, purposeful salvation in and through us over time. I am transformed by that as an individual, and I walk into that together with you, and we care and guide and intercede for each other. Can you see what we're driving at as far as transformation? I'm looking forward to talking about this more and more because it's always my great hope and prayer that we continue to grow together the way Paul describes it so much, in unity around the good work of Jesus. Let me pray. Father, there's so much here. There's so much. And yet it's so crucial. This is so important to you and consequently to us, God, to understand that transformation is good work over time. God, I pray that when I look at my own life, I can see the good work that you have done in my life. I can see the ways you have moved in and through me. And God, I pray that you would teach me how to bring that to the table here so that we can be transformed as a community, so that we can create a second nature of rolling with our circumstances in the Spirit purposefully as we bring your ongoing salvation to each other, God. And I pray for the inevitable reality that that becomes a guidance and a caretaking and an intercession for the world around us as well, Father. As much as it is uncomfortable for us, I pray, God, that you would help us to help each other die well. That you would help us to live our lives in such a way that when that occurs, when that shows up on our radar, either for us or the people who love us or that we love, Lord, that we would be prepared to be presented to you by our church family in that kind of righteousness and purity and blamelessness that can only come from an overflowing of your love, Lord. Please transform us, God. Amen. Thanks for hanging with me a little bit this morning, and we'll see you next Sunday.